Hey guys, today's video we're going to be talking about this guy. This is the Powerleap PL-iP3T. This is the version 2.0, and this is kind of one of the more sought after slot keys adapters. Basically what this does is allow you to use one of these kind of CPUs, Pentium II in this format, in a motherboard designed for this kind of CPU, the slot 1 that uses this sort of edge connector here. And this is one of the more sought after versions of those adapters. Now, you may recognize this if you watch my videos. We did talk about this card in my Gateway GP500 video. It was one of the only it was one of the only upgrades I did to that computer in that video that actually worked. So I thought it might be deserving of its own video because it is a pretty cool card. So what is special about this adapter compared to other adapters of this type? Well, this adapter allows you to use CPUs with the Tualatin core. Originally these did come with the 1.2 Celeron Tualatin core CPUs, but later I believe they did release ones with the 1.4 gigahertz Celeron with the Tualatin cores, and you can upgrade these. This one has the 1.2 gigahertz Celeron with the Tualatin core. I haven't touched it, that's just how I got it. This is the version 2. There was a version 1, which I will mention here in a minute, because there's some things I want to address about this card, and that came up in the comment section in my Gateway video. And the first one is, someone mentioned there's a little power adapter here. And someone said, why don't you just use the Floppy power adapter that is on pretty much every power supply unit? And there's a reason for that, and that is it does not fit. Here is the Floppy power connector, and not only is this go for 4 pins and this is 3, but these pins here are way too big. Well, not way too big, but they're too big. It will not fit. So this will not work. Now, doing some Googling and researching, I believe there was an earlier version of these adapters that actually did use the Floppy connector to supply power. This later version, the 2.0, as far as I can see, just came with this different adapter that uses the 3 prongs that are a little bit bigger. Now, I did kind of make a janky adapter here, and it works. You just take one of these. I just used one of these. It was an extension for a Molex connector. It was a Molex and Molex, and one end I just took this off, and right there, and these will fit just fine. It's a little janky, but it does work. I haven't had any problems with it. And if you do make one of these little connectors, it is yellow, black, and then finally the red. And there you go. I haven't really had any problem with that. Now I guess there is the chance of, you know, these aren't really insulated well, so there's a chance of, and this at least this middle one, they kind of come off kind of easy, but it's worked for me so far. But make one of these and use one of these at your own risk. I believe you can find the little plastic piece that would sort of make it kind of like this on this end. So if you want to make it a little more fancy and more safe, you can get those little plastic adapters, although the only site I seem to be able to find them on is in Europe, but they only want, I think if we translate it to US dollars, it would only be like $1, but then there's shipping, but it's not going to be much. So I just haven't really put the effort into making an actual nice end here for this. Okay, so looking at it here, of course, we have the heat-sinked fan with the CPU under there. Now, from what I can tell, these come with a few different fans. This is with an Intel fan, but there's also maybe Powerleap's own fan, which apparently connects a little bit differently. Now, I haven't... I think these can take full-blown Tualatins. So right now, officially, they only took Celerons. I don't see why they wouldn't take just full-blown Pentium IIIs and full-blown Pentium III Tualatins, and I'm a little embarrassed to admit this, but I haven't really fiddled with taking this fan and heatsink off, because these are kind of rare and a little bit expensive, and I'm a little bit worried about breaking it. I tried to kind of take this off, but doesn't seem completely kind of conventional. I don't know. I know it's just kind of gripping on there, but it's a little bit different than I'm used to. And I don't know if you're supposed to pull this up or down, or I don't know. I'm probably going to do that at the end of the video, maybe give it a shot, see what happens if we put in a real Tualatin, but I'm a little bit worried about breaking this thing, because sometimes I'm messing with these things and I get frustrated and I'll just yank it and break it, and I don't want that to happen, so I've just kind of left it alone. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe I'll try to put in a full Tualatin with the 512 KB of L2 cache. Maybe I won't. Anyways, there's not much to it. The fan on here connects right there. That's just a fan connector. Right here we have the jumpers to set the frontside bus. I think officially it's like 66-100, and you can set it for 133 megahertz frontside bus as well. And then down here we have the jumpers for voltage. Now, I noticed this when I was looking at the little. You can find the jumper layout for these really easy online. You just put in IP3/T Powerleap adapter. It will come up. It's pretty easy, but I noticed this is set in a way not on the jumper configuration chart. None of them should be how this is. The default would be, if I took that off and put it like nothing jumper is the default. This is how I got it. It's always been this way, and it's always worked with the jumper set this way, so I guess I don't know. So I'm just gonna leave it like that for right now. I don't think that's harming it. It seems to have been working fine. I've used this thing extensively, so jumpers will just set like this, unless this is a weird variant with a different jumper layout, and then I really don't want to mess with it. But yeah, that's about it. Nothing too fancy. Powerleap IP3/T. Guessing the T stands for Tualatin. So I guess we should just see this thing in action now. Alright, a quick look at the motherboard we'll be using for this project. This is a Slot 1 motherboard, and this is the Asus P3BF revision 1.03. I hate how the printing is, because I always think that's a 8 there, but it is a B, but it looks like an 8. Anyways, this is a nice motherboard. It takes anything from the slowest Pentium II up to the 1 GHz Pentium III, and it does accept our Powerleap adapter, although I'll talk about that in a second here. It's got ATA, although I think it's just ATA 33. That's why I have a ATA 100 card here. I just have a USB card for convenience. There's our GeForce 2 Ultra. Using this card just because it kind of fits the time period and it's pretty powerful. So it should eliminate possibly the bottleneck when testing games with this CPU, which is a 350 megahertz Pentium II. But it probably won't be a bottleneck when we upgrade to the Powerleap, but that's what I'm going with. AUS64 for our sound card, and we've got two ISA 16-bit. We have a AGP slot, I think it's ×2, and then we've got some PCI slots. RAM, it's limited to PC 100, I believe, but I think it can take a pretty large amount, maybe 1 gigabyte maybe, or 768 megabytes. I'm not sure on that. Doesn't really matter for the purposes of this video, though. This uses the Intel 440BX chipset. Very nice, stable chipset. I haven't had any problems using this board. This board has been just wonderful. I really like this board. One cool thing about it, too, is it does support overclocking. So yeah, you can play around with some frontside bus speeds with this, which we will be experimenting with. So, this is a 66 megahertz, 100 megahertz frontside bus board, but with these switches you can easily set it to 133 megahertz frontside bus, or some numbers in between and some numbers even over that. Stability may vary, but it's nice that you have the option there via this switch to overclock a little bit your frontside bus. Now I said earlier about supporting the Powerleap, the IP3T Powerleap adapter. Now, when I originally had this board, it had one of the very early BIOSes, and when I put in the Powerleap, I would just get a black screen. It wouldn't even post. So I did update it to the latest BIOS, and I've had no problems with the Powerleap adapter. So if you do have this board, update the BIOS. It's probably recommended to do with any board you get, but yeah, if you get this and you have a Powerleap on this board and it's not working, just remember, update the BIOS. That's what I had to do to get it working. Alright, so we're installed here. Now, one of the other comments I got on my gateway video is, instead of using this homemade sort of power adapter here that may be prone to melting or whatever, oh, it's getting caught on stuff, why not just install it, and instead of having it plug into itself, just plug it into the motherboard and run it that way? Well, that's because it doesn't work without the power hooked up. I just get nothing. I don't know why. I don't know why it needs this extra power plug hooked in. Apparently it's not just to power the fan. It's for something else, but it just needs that power for whatever reason. Maybe someone can enlighten me in the comments, but whenever I just hook it up this way, just put it in the slot, hook up the fan to the motherboard, I get no post, I get nothing. I always need to supply it with power through that. So that's why I had to make that sort of janky power adapter. And there we go. Well, it's coming up as a Pentium II, but 1.2 megahertz processor, and that is with my little janky, as I call it, little power adapter. Again, I don't know what it's doing with that extra power, that it needs that. It's not that it can't just pull it from the slot. Maybe it's something with the Tualatin that it needs extra power. I'm not sure, but yeah, you need that power going in there. You can't just plug it in and then put the fan in somewhere else. Although you can plug the fan into the motherboard and it will work, but you still have to use the power adapter. I don't know why you bother to do that though. Alright, so now it's time to move on to everyone's favorite benchmark charts, and hopefully I didn't have an oversight or screw these numbers up, but I've looked everything over and it looks like it's all on the up and up this time. Things have been hectic here lately, so a couple things have slipped by me, so always look at the comments section for corrections as well as the description. I'd also like to point out that these charts are not to show that the 1.3 gigahertz Celeron on the Powerleap adapter can beat a Pentium II 350 megahertz. Of course it can. Of course it's going to steamroll it. That's not the point of these charts. The point of the chart is just to see how much it can beat it, how much of an upgrade it is. I had a friend once say, you know, sometimes he likes to watch some sporting events, even though he knows the other team is like way better than the other. He knows they're going to win, more than likely. Sometimes you just like to tune in to see how much the other team is going to win. And that's what this thing, we know the Powerleap is going to beat the Pentium II, but sometimes it's kind of interesting to see just by how much it beats the Pentium II. And as we see here, it steamrolls it. Now I'm just using a Pentium II 350 megahertz as sort of a baseline for a late 90s system, and how much this upgrade could have helped in early 2000s. And just using these 3D Mark 99, 2000, and 2001 SE, it is quite a significant improvement. So let's look at some game benchmarks. Alright, so here we go with the game benchmarks. Remember, we're using the GeForce 2 Ultra. And of course, this upgrade with the Powerleap pretty much steamrolls the results with the Pentium II on all fronts. I did some earlier, I did like GL Quake and Quake II, but it was just too much. It just crushed them. So I just wanted to include some games that maybe stress things a little bit. I did these at 800 by 600 by 32 just to be a little bit fair to the Pentium II. So yeah, the Powerleap crushes all of these, and it leaves us ample room to even play with higher resolution. So pretty much all of these I did with that resolution, and then usually with the highest graphical settings. But yeah, with the Powerleap installed, some of these numbers are already crazy, but it gives us room that if you want to increase the resolution and settings, if you can, then you'll still get probably above 60 FPS in a lot of these.
Quake III and MDK2, the Powerleap just crushes. Not that the Pentium II is unplayable. Actually, it's pretty good. 50-some frames per second, so that's very playable. But like I said, with the Powerleap, you get some more room to play around with higher resolutions. Let's see, move on to Expendable. 34 FPS is definitely, certainly playable, but again, with the Powerleap, what are we in the 90s there? It just crushes it, gives us lots of room to play around. Same with Serious Sam. What is it? It's hard to see there. It's little on my screen. It looks like 30 some. It was playable. But of course that's was with the benchmark. Just in the gameplay, you know, early on in the game when there's not much going on, you get a lot higher frame rate. Then when you get a lot of stuff going on later, that might drop sometimes significantly. So that's just an average. I'd still say, you know, depending on your tolerances, you know, maybe playable, maybe not, but definitely with the Powerleap, that definitely makes the game playable and lets you play at higher resolutions. And then we have Comanche IV, and it is unplayable on the Pentium II. Barely playable, maybe on the Powerleap, but that is still a nice improvement. Of course, you could add a better graphics card, and then it would be definitely possibly playable with the Powerleap. But it's a big jump here. And while we're talking about these different benchmarks, I just want to go into a couple things here. And the first thing is, this is the Final Fantasy XI sort of benchmark utility for the online game. And it looks not so horrible here, but it slows down to a crawl. And this is with the Powerleap. So if the benchmark is any indication, this game wouldn't be playable on this system with the Powerleap. Off the top of my head, I forget when this game came out, but I swear it was the early 2000s, because I remember playing it in college. So I'm it's right there, 2002, 2004. So it's in that time frame of the early 2000s. But if the benchmark's any indication, it's just unplayable. It's like a slideshow, and this was with the Powerleap. Next thing I want to talk about is the Expendable benchmark. I don't know if this has happened to anybody else. This happens to me regardless of the computer I run this on. Completely different computers, completely different CPUs. This is what you're seeing now is a 350 megahertz Pentium II, but I've had it done with this machine when the Powerleap was on it. I've had this happen in the Pentium IV machine, but the benchmark for this game, for some reason, at least in my experience, maybe 1 out of every 3 or 4 times I run it, it just completely goes off script. As you can see here, it just goes off script. It looks like the character is still moving in his scripted fashion, but he's like in the wrong spot and he's doing it the wrong part of the benchmark. Like I said, like 1 out of 3 or 4 runs of the benchmark, this happens regardless of the machine. And I thought it was maybe, because the first time I seen this, it was on a faster Pentium IV. I was like, well, maybe the timings are thrown off because the CPU is just way too fast. But it happens even on the slow Pentium II. Here it is. This is with the Powerleap, and poor guy's getting ganged up on by like a million. It's just, I don't know why this happens. It doesn't seem to happen to anyone else but me. But yeah, I don't know why this benchmark likes to just go off script. Alright, so the last of the benchmarks that were just really super slow or just did weird things. Here's Farcry. Now, in my experience, I have found this game to be like really picky about drivers, which I think is the problem here. Which, by the way, all of these tests I did with NVIDIA drivers 30.84. Forgot to mention that earlier. But yeah, I know the GeForce 2 Ultra can run this game. I've had this issue before, I think with a Radeon 9700 Pro, and it's just, I'm pretty sure it's a driver issue, and I could have played around with drivers, but I just put it on and I was like, I'm not going to play around with it, but I thought it would be fun just to show him here real quick, just the weird graphical mess that it gave me when I just tried running it. Alright, so here we go with the Powerleap installed, and then when I ran CPU-Z, that's when I realized, oh yeah, it's a 1.3 gigahertz Celeron Tualatin CPU in there. I thought it was 1.2 because that's what the post screen was telling me, but that was all goofed up. But yeah, here it is running at 1.3 gigahertz. And there's the motherboard with the latest BIOS revision I could find. I believe that's definitely the latest out there for it. ×2 on the AGP bus, and our memory speed is PC 100. I've got 512 megabytes. We'll start off with some gameplay of Comanche IV. Obviously the Powerleap is on the right and the 350 megahertz Pentium II is on the left. And this is one game that, same graphics card and everything. All I did was pop in the Powerleap, and the Powerleap makes this game, at least according to the benchmark, infinitely more playable here. It's still, we're not getting, smooth, consistent 30 FPS, and I'm not sure how much this benchmark is suggestive of how the game itself would play. I didn't really play much of the game itself on the system in either setup, but according to the benchmark, it looks a lot more playable with the Powerleap installed, where it's virtually unplayable on the Pentium II. And then we have Quake III, which is playable on both platforms. Now again, the Pentium II 350 is on the left, and yeah, the frame rates are lower here, but it seems to be more or less over 30 FPS. But then again, if you do want a very smooth and much more consistent FPS, then yeah, the Powerleap, we've got a pretty smooth and consistent 91 plus FPS all the way throughout, where yeah, on the Pentium II it does dip into the 30s at times. Probably if you had a ton of stuff going on, you might dip under 30, but it more or less seems to stay above that. And here we have Serious Sam First Encounter running. Obviously the Powerleap is much more powerful than the Pentium II that is on the left. Again, I want to reiterate that. The Serious Sam wasn't like, I've said this before, so it wasn't unplayable, at least to me. You're seeing dips down into the mid-20s, and I'm sure, this is the beginning of the game. I'm sure later when there's more stuff going on, that might go down a lot more, where it did become sort of slideshow-ish, but it wasn't a horrible experience, at least playing this first part. And we were even getting frame rates up there in the 40s, and I'm talking about the Pentium II, but way better experience obviously on the Powerleap, and it would probably be a way better experience all the way through, even when things got messy later in the game. Probably a much better experience. Alright, so here we go with GTA 3, Grand Theft Auto 3. The Pentium II 350, as usual, is on the left. Just wanted to remind you guys, even though it's sort of obvious. Again, with the Powerleap, much better experience. Even for me, back in the day when I just wanted to play games, I didn't have much tolerance. Even for me, it might have been kind of unplayable on the Pentium II. So this is a good example of pop in the Powerleap and you get a much better experience. Now, I couldn't find concrete examples or evidence of this, but it seems that when the Powerleap came out with the 1.2 gigahertz Celeron in it, it was still cheaper than getting 1 gigahertz Pentium 3 slot 1 and putting that in. I believe it was, I forget, $169 I think I saw, and at that same time, getting a 100 megahertz frontside bus, 1 gigahertz Pentium 3 was still over $200. Again, don't quote me on all this stuff. It's reading it from unconfirmed sources online, but it seems like I don't see why that wouldn't be correct. But yeah, Powerleap drop-in CPU replacement certainly does make gaming on a slot 1 board a lot better. Now, of course, you wouldn't get as great results if you were upgrading from, say, like an 800 or 850 megahertz Pentium 3, but it would still be a decent upgrade, I think. So here's just a quick screenshot I took of looking up these Slotket adapters, and these are the early, like not earlier necessarily, but the more generic kind that you usually see, and they're very affordable. These, as far as I know, they don't accept the Tualatin, so they're limited to the 1 gigahertz and 1.1 I believe gigahertz Celerons or Pentium 3s, and I think these do just fine. You're not getting that much of an increase with the Tualatin chips. Well, you are, but it depends on if it's worth the money to you. Just wanted to make you aware there are cheaper alternatives to upgrading, because the slot 1 gigahertz CPUs are pretty expensive, whereas then the PGA 730 form, they're not that expensive. So it'd probably be a lot cheaper to grab one of these generic Slotkets and then get a socket 370, like 1 gigahertz Pentium III or Celeron, whatever. So I don't even, did they make a 1 gigahertz Celeron? And slap it on one of these and put it in your machine, and you'll also get great results. But if you do demand the very fastest, then yeah, I guess you do want to keep an eye out for the Powerleap that supports the 2-Alaton Celerons. And I would suspect 2-Alaton chips as well.
So obviously the Powerleap adapter is a significant power increase for a machine like this that maybe had a Pentium II or even an early Pentium III, and it's really elevated this machine up to something that even makes a decent early XP machine, early 2000s even, depending on your video card. But let's take it a little bit further and let's see if we can do a little bit of overclocking, as one of my commenters suggested. So as we can see from the spec sheet here, via these switches, this board supports a Frontside bus up to 150 megahertz. Now, of course, it doesn't recommend exceeding anything above 100 megahertz, but we're going to try a little modest overclock suggested in my comment section in the gateway video where I did feature this Powerleap adapter. So we're going to try a 112 megahertz overclock, and we'll see how it does. Alright, so all that really required was just flipping the switch number 8 up, and that was it. So we should have a Frontside bus of 112 megahertz, so we'll see what we get.
And as you can see here, our overclock was completely successful, so we're getting a 1.456 gigahertz bus speed of 112 megahertz. Now this also overclocked the RAM to 112 megahertz, but it's a nice little speed jump there. So it was rock solid, stable, no problems whatsoever. So let's look at some gameplay with this overclocked Powerleap. Alright, so here's Quake III again, but we're going to crank up the settings, crank up the resolution to 1600 by 1200, and just see how well this CPU can handle it.
We're tied for the lead.
And then we'll give Serious Sam first cover the same treatment with 1600 by 1200, and we'll push the thing up to quality visual settings. Here's Need for Speed Underground. First time ever playing this game. Details pushed up to high. We're only going to do 800 by 600 resolution. Although I didn't find too much of a difference when I went to 1024 by 768. Took me a second there. I didn't find too much of a difference. But we'll just go with 800 by 600 for this game and see how it does. And finally, let's take a look at GTA Vice City and see how it performs with the Powerleap overclock to 1.4 gigahertz.
Which has devastated 5 Caribbean islands and is heading for Vice City. More updates soon.
I'm taking it up to this next record. It is hot, baby. Know what it takes to make
He's out of control! Respond to attempt 51 North Ocean Beach. Respond to attempt 17 North Ocean Beach.
Alright, so the Powerleap converter, the IP3/T. And to note, I did put these jumpers for the voltage in the default position, and that's why I did all the testing with these in default. So I don't know why it was in that weird configuration before. It seemed to work both ways, but just to be safe, I put it in the default. So what do I think about this thing? Well, if you want to drag your Slot 1 system into the early 2000s and the Windows XP age, this will do the trick. I saw significant performance increases, and this allowed me to play some games that I wouldn't have been able to play otherwise, possibly. Now, the performance increase of this over, say, a 1 gigahertz Pentium III, now the price of these things, as far as I know, for what they go on eBay and whatnot, can be prohibitive. They're hard to come by, and they are expensive. I think they might go for around $100, give or take. I'm not too sure on that, but there's better options if you want an XP system. Just go for a Pentium IV, go for a Socket 370 Pentium III. I mean, this is a cool thing if you come across one randomly, like I kind of did, but I don't know if I'd go out of my way and spend $100 on one, unless, you know, you're just really into this kind of thing. But it did what it was advertised to do. It did increase the speed and performance of the system pretty significantly. Remember, your mileage may vary depending on the graphics card. I'm still going to be limited in that motherboard with AGP ×2, but you probably get better results with a more powerful graphics card. So there is that. I also want to point out that ASUS motherboard, the P3B, I think that it's a great board. I haven't had any problems with it. Stability has been excellent. Stability with that motherboard and with this adapter have been excellent. Through all my testing, I had no issues and I had no crashes. The only crash I had was once with the Expendable. For some reason it crashed on starting, and that was with the Pentium II installed, so that wasn't even this adapter's fault. It was probably just a fluke, but you know, I had no issues as far as stability goes. Some of the issues I did have with graphics and stuff, I'm pretty much going to chalk up to driver issues, so there is that. Yeah, I definitely would recommend that ASUS board. It's a really nice Slot 1 board. Now, for what I said earlier about putting in a 2-Allerton, replacing the Celeron with a 2-Allerton. Now, I don't really see why it wouldn't work. This supports a Frontside bus of 133 megahertz. The board does officially but unofficially, they just don't recommend it. I just don't know if it's worth the hassle. I don't know what kind of stability problems it's going to bring about. I'm still kind of cautious about taking this heatsink fan off. It's probably really simple, but I don't know. I feel a certain foreboding about it for some reason. I am pretty content with the 1.3 gigahertz Celeron in here, 2-Allerton Celeron, and it did really well with the overclock. Again, it didn't really heat up very much, no stability issues whatsoever, and that gave me a decent speed. I'm not really sure how much speed increase I would get with the 2-Allerton with that extra 256 KB of L2 cache, and of course the higher front side bus speeds. But again, I am interested to see how stable it would be, but I'm not really sure if it's worth the hassle, but you guys let me know. If you think it's worth the hassle, if you would like to see that, let me know in the comments. If you don't think it will work, let me know in the comments. If you think it should be easy peasy, let me know in the comments. If I get enough people really wanting for me to upgrade this adapter here, I'll give it a shot. But other than that, yeah, again, this does what it says as advertised, but I think if you want a early XP or very fast Windows rig, there's much cheaper ways of going about that. But if you really love your Slot 1 motherboard and you really want to drag it into the early XP age, this guy will do the trick. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys next time, and thank you for watching the video. Please like and subscribe and all that jazz, and we'll see you next time.